Right, hello. Welcome to the story of the submarine, probably the most infamous great white shark that has ever been in the oceans. It's a long story, but the submarine is a very interesting story. Story of a giant great white shark that used to maraud the waters of False Bay back in the 70s and the early 80s. Some call it myth and legend, and others say that it really did exist. It did exist, and I know it existed because I personally saw the submarine on 3 occasions, and on one of those occasions I came very close to losing my life to the animal. I was only a kid, I was like 13 years old. But I want to give you a little bit of background first of all before we get into the submarine. Just some background on myself leading up to the submarine, because it's a very interesting story with some very interesting characters. I was born in Durban up on the northeast coast. Right now I'm making this video down in a place called Mossel Bay, which is on the south coast. It's probably the most prolific great white shark area in the world. But I was born in Durban. And my father was an ardent sports fisherman. He loved fishing, he'd catch anything. I mean, if he had to, he'd sit and catch goldfish. I mean, he was a nutcase when it came to fishing. But his pet thing was catching sharks. He loved catching sharks. And he used to catch them off the different piers along the Durban beachfront, North Pier, and the West Street Groin was his favorite pier to catch sharks off. He used to catch bull sharks and dusky sharks and sand tiger sharks, and a lot of the sharks he let them all go. He never kept them. He put them back in the water, but once in a while he catch something big, and you'd see my father with this big shark over his shoulders. He was a big man, and he'd be carrying the shark across the road to the SeaWorld, the Durban Aquarium, and then the shark would be in the Durban Aquarium. And you know, my mom would take me down to see the sharks that my father had caught in the aquarium. And I remember one day, I was about 6 years old, and I went down to see a particularly large black-tip shark that my father had caught. And it was a beautiful specimen. And I remember going to that aquarium that day, and it was one of those old-fashioned aquariums, so these 1 by 1 meter glass windows, surrounded by cement and this thick, and you know, the tank was kind of oval and not very large, and I had my face against the glass of that aquarium, the dampness, and I can remember the dampness on my cheek. I was looking into the tank trying to see the shark, and I couldn't see the black-tip shark. Obviously it was swimming on the bottom, or maybe got eaten by the bull sharks, I don't know. But anyway, this big bull shark swam past the window, right past me, right in front of my eyes. And I remembered it was all grey, and it was big, and it had this big jaw and this blunt snout, and it was full of fins. And that was the day I really fell in love with sharks. And I decided that I would one day work professionally with sharks. Anyway, later on I saw the movie or the documentary Blue Water White Death, and I fell completely in love with the great white shark. And when I was 11, 12 years old, we moved down to Cape Town, and we went to live in Somerset West, overlooking False Bay. And my father bought himself a 20-foot fishing boat with 2 outboard engines on the back, and we started fishing in False Bay. You know, and of course we started hearing all these stories about the great white sharks of False Bay. False Bay was very famous for great white sharks, and still is. And in these stories we heard about the submarine. People started telling us about the submarine. And you'd ask them, how big is the shark? And it was like, the shark's 40 feet long, the shark's 35 feet long, the shark's 25 feet long. And most of the time it depended on how many brandies the fisherman had, killed before he told the story about the submarine. And of course they told us that the eye was the size of a dinner plate and all this kind of thing. But the reality of it was that we didn't know how big the submarine was. We didn't even know if it existed. So one day, we rock up at this place called Art Smart down in the Strand. And Art Smart is just this junkyard of everything. It belonged to this big bear of an old man. He wasn't that old at the time, he just had a lot of mileage on him. Big beard, piercing eyes. His name was Arthur Ridgway. And he was a legend in the Strand, you know. You'd see him any day of the week up and down in his beach buggy with his fishing rods at the back, and he was going fishing. So he's just 1 or 2 roads back from the beach. You can smell the ocean. It's a gorgeous summer's day, and my dad and I stroll into Art Smart's place, and it's a ramshackle barn with the roof sagging and these old wooden doors, tired, sprawling out onto the pavement. But the only thing that still had any pride in the building was the name. Big Art Smart in gold and green letters, you know. And we walk inside this place, and my dad shouts out, "Anybody home?" And we hear nothing. My dad shouts again, "Hello, anybody home?" And somewhere from the back of this junkyard of stuff, and I mean this place, Art Smart was a second-hand place. It sold second-hand furniture and nails and nuts and bolts and vacuum cleaners and you name it, he sold it. Pots and pans and all sorts of stuff. But it looked like a dump truck. It actually just reversed into Art Smart's place and just dumped everything there, and people could come and buy it. So anyway, we had this gruff voice on the back of the shop. Yeah. Wake up the goddamn dad, will you? And there comes old Art. He comes marching through his junkyard, and he's got this tattered old jersey on and his stained blue shorts on, and there's a table there with a bunch of fishing reels all taken apart in different pieces, and you can see he's been repairing them and servicing these reels. He was an expert at this kind of thing. So he walks up to us and walks right up to my dad, and he's about my dad's height, not as big as my dad. My dad weighed 250 pounds, he was a big man. Art probably weighed 220 pounds, also a big man. So he walks up to my dad, he stands here and he stares at my father for a little bit, kind of trying to make up his mind if he likes my father or not. And then his grin crosses his face and he puts out his mitt of a hand, like a big leathery hand, and he shakes hands. So my dad says, "Art's the name." There's Theo Ferreira is my name. And anyway, he looks at me and he says, "What's your name, young man?" And I say, "My name's Craig, Uncle Arthur." So anyway, he says, "What can I do you for?" So my dad says, "Well, I hear around town you're the man to talk about fishing and fishing equipment. You know, I'm a fisherman. I want to talk to you about what's going on out in the bay. You know, we just moved down from Durban. I bought a boat." So Art says, "What boat you buy?" My dad says, "I bought an old boat. Well, I bought a boat called Ivanhoe. I've renamed it to Tana." So Art says, "I know the boat, Ivanhoe. It's a Robcraft. It's a good boat. It's a good sea boat." So my dad says, "Well, I like it." So anyway, Art says, "Well, come on, let's go sit down. Let's talk fishing." So we go to this little desk. Just as you walk into Art Smart on the left-hand side, there's this little desk, and there's a money box open with a few bucks in it. And it's a mess. The desk is a mess, and behind the desk is this old swivel leather chair that looked like it was once maybe expensive. Looked like maybe it came from a lawyer's office or a doctor's office, and there were a couple of other chairs that my dad and I took up on the other side. But before Art threw his big frame into his chair, he went and he stretched the chain across the entrance of his shop, and it said closed. So my dad said, "Hey, Art, you don't have to close the shop on our account." So Art says, "You want to talk about fishing or fucking? I close the shop." And he burst out laughing. He just burst out laughing, this man. Crazy old dude. Anyway, so my dad and Art start talking about fishing and blah, blah, blah. And I'm listening. I'm enthralled by these two pair of men talking about fishing and all the rest of it. And eventually I get a chance to say something. And I say, "Uncle Arthur, have you ever heard of the Submarine?" And he looks at me and says, "Sure, I've heard of the Submarine." And now my heart's beating. I'm so excited. So I say to him, have you ever seen the submarine? So Arthur says, yes, I've seen the submarine one time. He says, I was out with a cat called Tuck. He called people cats. You know, a guy that thought he was a big deal was a cat. So he says, I was out fishing with a guy called Tuckies one day, and we hooked the submarine. We hooked the submarine about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and 9 o'clock that night I cut his line because I just had enough of fighting this animal. And he says, since then, Tuckies and I haven't spoken again. So, and then he said, and there's a couple of other cats as well. He says there's Stumbo Mason. He's also hooked the submarine. He's tried to catch it. He says one of the teachers from the school up the road, Hottentots Holland High, Donnie Skuman, he tried to catch the submarine. He ended up with a hole in his boat. So he says, I've seen it. So I say to him, but Uncle Art, how big is this? How big was the shark? Well, how big is the submarine? And he says, my boy, that shark is probably around 21 feet long. So I said, yeah, but I heard that it's big. I heard that it's 25 feet or 30 feet or 40 feet. So he said, he says, you'll hear all sorts of stories about the submarine. He says, he estimated the shark to be about 24, 25 feet. Stumbo says it's around 24 feet, 23 feet. Donnie says it's about 24, 25 feet. So, you know, but fishermen, he says, fishermen all exaggerate, so you got to take off a couple of feet. But I think it was about 21 feet. So anyway, he says, but it's the biggest great white shark I've ever seen out there in False Bay. So I'm all excited. And yeah, so we carry on chatting. My dad and Art carry on chatting about the shark, the submarine. And my mind is going crazy because now I want to see this animal. So, but before we see this animal, I'll just tell you a little bit of a story before this particular video ends. One day, now Uncle Arthur had actually become a regular on our boat. And he used to go fishing with us, and him and my dad forged a good friendship right from the start. So one day we get down to the harbor very early in the morning, the sun hasn't even come over the mountains, and my dad sends me over to the little Gordons Bay Cafe where we launch our boat to get some coffee. So I walk into the Gordons Bay Cafe and I order 3 or 4 cups of coffee. It was myself, my dad, Uncle Arthur, and one of the people that worked for my dad, Trevor Grant, on the boat. And while I'm waiting for them to do the coffee, I walk into the little curio shop next door to the coffee shop. And as I walk in there, there's this dried out head of a great white shark. And it's probably from a 2.5, 3 meter great white shark, probably smaller than 3 meters. And it's got its mouth wide open like that, and its skin's all crinkled. But it's the most beautiful, frightening thing I've ever seen. I just can't take my eyes off this thing. And I remember running my fingers across the teeth of this animal, and they were razor sharp. So I run outside, and I tell my dad, Dad, come have a look at this, come have a look at this. So he comes inside, and there's this shark head there, this great white shark's head. So I say to him, can you buy it for me, please? So he says, there's no chance I'm buying that thing. I buy that thing, you bring that smelly head back home, your mother will divorce me. So anyway, I tried my luck, and he said no. And then I started having this obsession about catching a great white shark. And a couple of weeks later, after nagging the hell out of my father, he eventually said to me, okay, there, take that tuna fishing rod, take that reel, catch a goddamn great white shark the next time we go fishing. And the next weekend we went out fishing, I stuck a line in the water, and I became the youngest person in the world to catch a great white shark at the age of 12. And it wasn't a big animal, it was probably 2.5 meters long, but to me it was a monster. And that was my real initiation. That was the first live great white shark I ever saw. So that's the end of this part of the story, and it'll continue into where we first encountered the great white shark and so on and so forth. And it gets very exciting. So thank you, and hang in there for the next one.